In a stunning turn of events that no one inside the packed federal courtroom could have predicted, the tension in the air thickened to the point where even the quiet hum of the overhead lights seemed deafening. It had already been a day of sharp exchanges, raised eyebrows, and relentless flashes from cameras just outside the courthouse steps. Reporters had gathered since dawn, sensing that something dramatic was about to unfold. But no one expected the moment that would send shockwaves through political circles and social media feeds around the world. Ivanka sat at the defense table, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed, though the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. The proceedings had stretched on for hours, arguments circling, legal strategies colliding. What had begun as a procedural hearing had evolved into something far more volatile. The judge, known for his stern demeanor and little tolerance for theatrics, had grown visibly impatient with the back and forth. Then came the moment that would change everything. The prosecution had pressed for immediate custodial measures pending further review, citing procedural complications and what they described as a refusal to comply with specific court directives. The defense objected vigorously, arguing that any such action would be unnecessary and excessive. Voices rose, papers shuffled. The gallery leaned forward in collective anticipation. The judge leaned back in his chair, peering over his glasses with a gaze that could silence a room. He spoke slowly, deliberately, reminding everyone present that his courtroom was governed by order and respect. But when Ivanka's legal team attempted one more last-minute maneuver, requesting outside intervention and calling upon family influence to assist in negotiations, the atmosphere shifted. All eyes turned toward the back of the courtroom where Melania sat, composed, elegant, her expression inscrutable. She had remained silent throughout the proceedings, a quiet presence whose mere attendance carried symbolic weight. Whispers had circulated that her involvement behind the scenes might smooth tensions, that her voice could potentially alter the course of events. The defense seemed to believe so. One of the attorneys glanced toward her subtly at first, then more directly, as if seeking a signal. The implication was clear. A gesture, a word, a sign of support might sway perception, perhaps even encourage reconsideration of the court's immediate stance. But Melania did not move. The stillness was palpable. Cameras in the gallery attempted to capture her face, but she remained poised, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The judge noticed the exchange, his brow furrowing. "Is there someone else intending to address this court?" he asked sharply. The defense hesitated. A murmur rippled through the room. When no one stood, when no statement came, the judge's patience reached its limit. "If the court's orders are not being taken seriously," he said, his voice firm and resonant, "then this court will ensure compliance by other means." There was a brief, chilling pause. "Marshal." The single word cut through the courtroom like a blade. 2 U.S. Marshals stationed near the entrance stepped forward instantly, their presence transforming the atmosphere from heated debate to stark reality. The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed faintly as they approached. Gasps filled the gallery. Reporters scrambled, their fingers flying across keyboards. Outside, words spread within seconds, amplified by live feeds and breaking news banners. Ivanka's composure wavered for the first time. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward Melania. It was not dramatic or exaggerated, just a fleeting look, a silent appeal that seemed to carry years of shared history, family gatherings, public appearances, carefully curated smiles. Melania met her eyes briefly, and then looked away. That subtle motion, barely perceptible, became the defining image of the day. The marshals stood at the defense table. The judge reiterated that the action was procedural, a temporary measure pending further review. But in the court of public opinion, nuance rarely survives. What the cameras captured was stark and undeniable. A high-profile figure being escorted from a courtroom while another family member sat motionless, declining to intervene. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into a chaotic symphony of shouting voices. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief. Supporters waved signs, detractors raised placards of their own. The divide was as visible as the barricades separating them. Inside a nearby news van, anchors struggled to keep pace with the unfolding drama. "We're witnessing an extraordinary development," one said breathlessly. The judge has called in federal marshals after what appears to be a refusal of outside intervention. Social media ignited instantly. Clips of Melania's stillness replayed on endless loops, analyzed frame by frame. Commentators speculated about motives, loyalties, private conversations that may or may not have taken place. Was her silence strategic? Was it a message? Or was it simply adherence to legal boundaries? Back in the courtroom, as Ivanka was led through a side door, the heavy wood closed with a final echoing thud. The sound seemed to reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. Melania remained seated for several moments after the room began to clear. Her expression had not changed. Yet those who watched closely noticed a subtle tightening of her jaw, a measured inhale before she rose gracefully from her seat. She did not address reporters waiting outside. She did not offer a statement or even a glance toward the cameras. Instead, she moved through a private corridor arranged by security, shielded from the frenzy. Behind closed doors, conversations erupted among legal teams and advisors. Some argued that public silence was the only prudent course. Others insisted that the optics were devastating. The phrase "refuses to rescue" began trending within minutes, a dramatic simplification that ignored the complex legal framework at play. In a quiet holding area within the courthouse, Ivanka sat on a narrow bench, hands clasped tightly together. The shock of the moment settled in. She had known the hearing carried risk. She had prepared for difficult questions. But the swift call for marshals had caught her off guard. Her attorneys rushed in shortly afterward, assuring her that this was temporary, that appeals and motions were already in progress. Yet the emotional impact lingered. Public figures are accustomed to scrutiny, but the vulnerability of being escorted under authority carries a unique weight. Meanwhile, across town, political analysts filled studio panels, dissecting every detail. One pointed out that judges are bound strictly by procedural requirements, unaffected by family dynamics. Another suggested that the silent exchange between Melania and Ivanka symbolized deeper undercurrents within powerful families navigating public storms. Speculation grew wilder by the hour. Some claimed rifts. Others dismissed the narrative as media exaggeration. Yet the image endured. A judge's firm command, marshals stepping forward, and Melania's unwavering stillness. As evening approached, statements began trickling out. A brief message from Ivanka's spokesperson emphasized respect for the judicial process and confidence in eventual resolution. There was no mention of family involvement. Melania's office remained silent. That silence became its own story. In the days that followed, the courtroom moment replayed endlessly on news channels. Commentators slowed the footage to examine micro-expressions. Lip-reading experts claimed to decipher whispers that may never have existed. Body language analysts filled columns with interpretations. But beyond the spectacle lay a more human dimension. For Ivanka, the experience marked a sobering confrontation with the limits of influence. Public life often creates the illusion of control, that connections and reputation can soften institutional rigidity. The judge's decision shattered that illusion decisively. For Melania, the moment represented something more ambiguous. Observers debated whether her refusal to intervene was a sign of strength, an understanding that legal matters must unfold independently, or an indication of emotional distance. Without a public statement, the vacuum invited projection. Late one evening, as the city lights flickered against the darkened skyline, sources close to the family described a private meeting that took place away from cameras. No reporters were present, no microphones hidden in floral arrangements. Just a quiet room and two individuals navigating a storm far louder than any words exchanged within it. The conversation, according to those familiar with it, was measured and deliberate. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, there was acknowledgement of reality, that courts operate on law, not loyalty, that public perception can spiral beyond anyone's control, that silence can be both shield and burden. Outside, the narrative machine churned relentlessly. Headlines grew more sensational. Pundits predicted long-term political ramifications. Supporters organized rallies. Critics sharpened arguments. Yet the legal process moved forward methodically, indifferent to the frenzy. Weeks later, when Ivanka returned to court under adjusted conditions, the atmosphere was markedly different. The shock had subsided, replaced by a more subdued tension. This time, there were no dramatic gestures, no glances toward the gallery. Melania did not attend. Some interpreted her absence as confirmation of distance. Others saw it as a strategic retreat from spectacle. In truth, the complexity of personal relationships rarely aligns neatly with public narratives. The judge, maintaining his characteristic composure, addressed procedural matters efficiently. There were no raised voices. The marshals stood at their usual posts, unobtrusive but present, a quiet reminder of authority. As proceedings concluded for the day, Ivanka exited through the main doors, pausing briefly before stepping into the waiting vehicle. She offered no comments, but her expression carried a new gravity. The courthouse steps, once a stage for dramatic confrontation, felt almost ordinary again. Months from now, analysts would still reference the moment when the judge called for marshals. It would be cited in discussions about the rule of law, about optics, about the intersection of family and public responsibility. But beyond the analysis and the headlines, the scene remained at its core a powerful illustration of institutional boundaries. A judge asserting order, marshals fulfilling duty, a family member choosing silence, and a nation watching, projecting, debating. In the end, perhaps the most enduring image was not one of conflict, but of stillness. The quiet refusal to blur lines that the legal system insists remain clear. The echo of that single word, marshal, lingered long after the courtroom emptied, a reminder that in certain rooms, authority speaks louder than influence, and silence can carry more weight than any shouted plea. And as the media cycle moved on to the next crisis, the next headline, the moment settled into history, an extraordinary convergence of law, loyalty, and the unyielding glare of public scrutiny.